Working irregular hours can be hard on your body, but especially hard on your digestive system. A recent study found nurses who worked rotating shifts were more likely to develop irritable bowel syndrome. Here to tell us more about this new research and the health effects of shift work is Dr. Patricia Turner, an assistant professor of surgery at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Dr. Turner, great to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So if you would, can you tell us a little bit more about the results of this study that I understand looked at nurses who worked rotating shifts?
So the study looked at about 400 women who were nurses who worked either day shift, night shift, or rotating shifts. And the rotating shift nurses could be on days one week, nights another week, and really did not have a regular schedule. And what they found is that the incidence of irritable bowel symptoms was greatest in those rotating shift workers, and more so than in the night workers, and then the night workers more so than in the day workers. So their conclusion was that the shift work contributed to or was associated with irritable bowel disease symptoms.
So the less regular the schedule, in other words, the less typical the schedule, the more likely they were to have irritable bowel syndrome.
Right, and that's what they found. And they found that that was independent of the quality of sleep, because some people might have said, well, you know, maybe if you're doing shift work, you don't sleep well. And they really didn't find that the sleep quality was the associated factor, but really that the shift work was.
Fascinating. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what exactly irritable bowel syndrome is.
Well, it's a constellation of symptoms, or a collection of symptoms that's found to, in some ways, affect more young people than old people. In some ways, seems to affect women more than men. So in many ways, looking at a group of nurses was a good way to get at that demographic. But it tends to include bloating, abdominal pain, and then can include either constipation or diarrhea. So some dysregulation of the GI tract, but not necessarily one or the other. And if there are other causes for it, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, some other known entities, and of course you don't call them irritable bowel disease, but if you don't have a diagnosis and you have that constellation of symptoms of bloating, the pain, the constipation or diarrhea, then it's called in many cases irritable bowel syndrome.
And how likely were the nurses who worked the rotating shifts, how likely were they to have irritable bowel syndrome?
You know, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was about 81% compared to about 50%. So, you know, a significant increase in numbers.
Absolutely. And so is it the shift work, since it's not tied to the quality of sleep, what do doctors think is causing it? Just the irregular hours themselves, bad eating habits, or is that still unclear?
Well, I think it's unclear. The sleep quality question was asked to see whether it was literally that if you don't get good sleep, then you have irritable bowel, and that was not shown to be the case. There's some question that it may also be related to things that were not asked about in the study. For example, diet was not specifically evaluated in the study, so what we can't say is whether maybe the people who worked the shift had different eating habits than those who worked days or nights. Another thing that was not evaluated was their living status at home. So it is possible that there's some impact that folks who live alone, and that's been shown to have different sorts of impacts on health, may also have a higher risk of irritable bowel. So that's something that wasn't identified.
I'll tell you, I've worked the overnight shift here at ABC News, and we do a lot of sugary snacking to keep ourselves awake when that happens. So I wonder if, I mean, I guess there hasn't been any study looking at this specifically, but is there a general understanding that a lot more of that kind of eating goes on if you work overnights?
It certainly may be that. Another thing the authors put forth, which is an interesting idea, is that people who may have had pre-existing abdominal complaints, who might have diarrhea or constipation or bloating and need to take time off from work, may gravitate towards jobs that allow them to have that flexibility. So there's, you know, that's an interesting idea that I wouldn't have thought of, that the authors set forth as a possibility that those folks may gravitate towards the shift work.
Very interesting. So it's sort of which comes first, the chicken or the egg in that case.
Right.
Now, what advice do you have for people who do work irregular hours or schedules to help them feel better on the job or even afterwards?
Well, so it's a great question, because in many cases, a lot of us have trouble as we get busier and busier actually making time to go to the bathroom. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but as you get busier and busier, you may not have time in the mornings, or you may not have time at night, or you may not, want to or have time to go to the bathroom when you're at work. And so what has happened is we've gotten ourselves into a situation where you may not be able to have the comfort or the time or the quality time to take care of our required bodily functions. And so if you put it off, then you may not have the urge to go for another day or so, and then that sets you up for constipation. That's one example.
Fascinating, doctor. A great observation. Now, what about working the night shift? Are there any physical or mental health risks that these employees might face?
Well, so there is some evidence that depression and anxiety are associated with shift work, and to a lesser extent with night work. So there's certainly attention being paid to that, and I don't know that that's been fully understood. Something perhaps having to do with circadian rhythms, and the fact that we all have internal body rhythms that are associated with the sun rising and setting. If you have your rhythms off from the sun rising and setting, that may make you a little off kilter.
Absolutely. We all seem to need that sunlight, don't we? All right, Dr. Turner, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for more health news and information that's good to know, please visit the health page at abcnews.com.